Beneath the streets of Ireland's second city, 2 to 3 metres under the pavement, archaeologists found something extraordinary. Timber walls still standing in the mud after 1,000 years. The remains of a forgotten settlement built on marshland, so soft that every house had to be raised on platforms of packed clay just to survive the tide. This is the story of how a quiet monastery on a river became a target, then a fortress, then a trading port that connected Ireland to the world. In this video, we use AI tools to visually reconstruct what these places may have looked like. Some details may not be perfectly accurate, but every effort has been made to stay as close to the historical record as possible. Long before any Northmen ever set foot in this valley, the River Lee already had a guardian. In the early 7th century, a monk known as Finbar followed the river eastward from the mountains to the sea, where the Lee split into channels and flooded the lowlands, creating a maze of marshy islands. He founded a monastery. The Irish called this place Corkay, which simply means marsh. Finbar's monastery stood on a limestone ridge above the south bank of the Lee, overlooking the wetlands below. The buildings were modest, timber churches with thatched roofs, wattle and daub cells where monks lived and studied, a small cemetery. But the reputation of the school grew across Munster, and the monastery attracted students and pilgrims from across southern Ireland. For 2 centuries, Corkay remained a place of prayer and learning. Then around 820, everything changed. Norse raiders attacked the monastery. They came by river, navigating the Lee in shallow draft longships, targeting the one place in the region that held concentrated wealth, gold, silver, and sacred relics. The annals mention only a handful of raids on Cork over the following decades, but one entry reveals something crucial. In 846, the King of Munster attacked a Viking stronghold at Cork. Not a raiding party, a stronghold. The Norse had stopped passing through. They were staying. For nearly 20 years, this fortress controlled the lowest crossing point of the Lee. Then in 865, the Viking leader at Cork was killed in a clash with local Irish forces, and the settlement fell silent. The first chapter of Viking Cork was over, but it would not be the last. For nearly 50 years after the fall of that first stronghold, Cork disappears from the Viking story entirely. The annals go silent. Whatever remained on the banks of the Lee was too small or too quiet to be recorded. Then, in 914, a great fleet arrived from overseas and devastated Munster. This was not the same wave. The first Vikings at Cork had been Norwegian. These newcomers were Danish, and they came not just to raid, but to stay. According to a medieval Irish chronicle known as The War of the Irish with the Foreigners, some of these Scandinavians settled at Cork and reached an understanding with the monks of the nearby monastery. The relationship was not built on fear. It was built on trade. The churchmen purchased English salt and French wine through the Viking merchants. In return, the settlement exported wool, cattle hides, and meat to ports across the Irish Sea and beyond. The Northmen spread across 3 areas around the Lee. On the South Valley side, close to the monastery, they built along what is now Barrack Street. On a marshy island in the river, they laid the foundations of what would become South Main Street. And on the northern hillside, near a small river called the Kiln, they built a watermill. An inscribed stone discovered in the 1920s dated that mill to 1020. If you're enjoying this video and want to help this channel grow and produce more content like this, consider joining as a member. Your support makes a real difference. Over the decades, something remarkable happened. The Vikings stopped being foreigners. They married into Irish families. They adopted local customs. They became what historians now call Hiberno-Norse, a people who were neither fully Scandinavian nor fully Irish, but something entirely new. In 1081, Cork was devastated. Houses and churches were burned to the ground. The annals do not say who attacked, but the destruction was total. And yet within just a few years, the people of Cork did something extraordinary. They rebuilt, and this time they did it to last. Archaeologists working beneath South Main Street have uncovered what happened next. Starting around 1070 and accelerating after the fire, the settlers began driving wooden posts into the marsh and packing thick layers of clay between timber frames to create raised platforms above the floodline. On these platforms they built houses, small, simple, one-room dwellings, roughly 40 square metres, with thatched roofs held up by 4 internal posts. When families grew, they added smaller buildings behind the main house, around a paved yard. The layout followed a pattern found in every Hiberno-Norse town in Ireland. A central path ran north to south. Property plots branched off at right angles. Storage pits, outhouses, and work areas filled the gaps between homes. On the riverbank nearby, a small harbour allowed boats to pull in from the lee. A hill leading down to the waterfront still carries a name of Scandinavian origin, meaning the passage to the shore. Among the mud and timber, archaeologists found the everyday objects of a working town. A weaver's sword carved from yew wood, used to beat threads tight on a loom. A decorated thread winder, a wooden saddle pommel, a small wooden toy boat, perhaps once held by a child living on these marshy islands over 900 years ago. Cork was no longer a camp, it was a home. By the 12th century, Viking Cork had become something more than a trading post. It had a leader, a fleet, churches, and a relationship with the most powerful Irish dynasty in Munster. The kings of Desmond kept their royal seat at an old fort on the hillside north of the Lee, overlooking the settlement below. They shared power with the Hiberno-Norse community, granting them trading rights and using their ships as a naval force. The last known leader of that community was a man whose very name told the story of two cultures merging into one. Half Irish, half Norse, he commanded the fleet of Desmond and kept a residence on the South Island with a private chapel in his courtyard. In 1173, he led a fleet of 32 ships against Norman invaders near the coast. He was killed in the battle. 4 years later, in 1177, English knights captured Cork, plundered the town, and expelled its people. The settlers who had built their lives on mud and timber for over 2 centuries vanished from history. But they left something behind. Walk down South Main Street today, and you are walking the central axis of the old Hiberno-Norse settlement. The street pattern of modern Cork still follows the lines that were first drawn in the Marsh over 900 years ago by people who came from the sea and learned to call the swamp home.